Hi, we're now joined by Sudarshan, who is our technical architect and one of the key members of our technical team. And he'll be helping shed some light on Walrus, on Sui, on Seal, and how we are utilizing each of these features from Sui. Welcome, Sudarshan.
Thank you, Chandru.
So what we are talking about here is the replication of data and the security that is associated with the decentralization of this data. So when data is replicated and stored in multiple places, as is provided by Walrus, it will give us the confidence that the data is not going to be modified, it's not going to be lost, and there is a level of confidence and assurance that people will have. And when I say people, it could be our publishing partners, it could be our advertising partners, who all rely on this data in order to determine how much of money needs to be paid by the advertiser to the publisher and how much of that is going to be taken away by Alkimi. So all of that reconciliation of financial information is actually dependent on the ad impression data. And what I gather from what you're saying is that since this ad impression data is so critical for everything across the business, we need to provide a level of assurance, security that comes with decentralization, and that is what is provided by Walrus. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely right, Chandru. Replication is one thing. The second thing is even the ability to locate such a data for people who are outside the system, outside the ecosystem, is not going to be easy. So it's like, I own the data, I know where it is, and nobody else need to know. And this is a large ocean within which this data is stored. So the probability of searching such data without relevant keys, if I may call it, is next to impossible.
Right. So when you talk about keys, that's a very interesting topic, because when we actually deal with data in the advertising world, a lot of this data is actually PII data, personally identifiable information. There is a lot of confidential data, not all of which can be revealed to the community, not all of which can be revealed to other partners who are not authorized to see that data. So there is a level of confidentiality that we will need to maintain with certain data fields and certain pieces of information. Having covered all of that, Sudarshan, now can we move into a few more technical details of how Alkimi is using Walrus? Now, we have already covered the fact that Walrus is a decentralized storage solution, and there is a level of decentralization and associated security due to replication of data that is absolutely required for Alkimi, so that we can reconcile all of that data into financial transactions. So let's go one level deeper. What is being stored on Walrus? How are we storing this data on Walrus? And what are the details associated with that? Can we talk about that?
Yeah. So in our case, Chandru, we are using Sui as L1. We use Walrus as the storage part of it. It's not required that everything that we want to store should go on the blockchain, Sui blockchain. Rather, what we do is we store the data, which is ad transactions in our case. So we have the ad transaction data that is getting into the Walrus, and the metadata is the one that gets certified with
Sui.
on Sui.
That's very true. So the way it has been designed for the benefit of everybody is that there is ad transaction data, which is the transaction details that you see on the Ads Explorer today, which includes details of the bid request ID, the ad slot IDs, the flow bid prices, and the winning prize, and so on and so forth. So all of this is data associated with each of the ad transactions, each of the ad slots, which result in ad impressions. Now, that is one level of detail, but there is another level of detail which then goes into what are the transactions and what are the ad impressions that are stored in each blob. Each blob contains thousands of transactions. It could be even more than that, based on the amount of detail that we want to store for every ad impression and the size of the blob. Now, the size of the blob itself has a lot of science behind it, because a blob is created, then encoded, then replicated and stored on Walrus. Now, based on the size of the blob, we have an encoded size and an associated cost to be paid in Walrus. But when an ad transaction needs to be retrieved, we need to have a record of which blob is storing each of these ad transactions, each of these ad impressions. And we also need to cater to the amount of time taken to retrieve each of these ad impressions from a given blob. So there are overheads such as identifying and keeping a record of the blobs and the ad transactions or ad impressions that go into a blob, and then the overhead of searching for that particular ad impression within a given blob, which is where I think, Sudarshan, the question of how big the blob size should be and the number of ad transactions and impressions that go into the blob becomes so relevant.
Right. So we had to do certain experiments on that as well, Chandru. So to arrive at the most optimal blob size for our use case. It may vary from use case to use case, but our use case, we did certain experiments to find out what's the best blob size, so that there is good write efficiency and good read efficiency.
Absolutely, and this is not set in stone, right? Because it changes as the usage of the ad exchange grows, and as the number of transaction grows, we may decide to go for a higher blob size, and that is entirely a floating value. So while we are not tied to a blob size, we also have to consider the delays or the latencies involved in reading from a blob and how efficient that can be made while we prepare aggregated reports that are then provided to publishers and advertisers. So all of this can now become possible while all of these blobs are then stored on Walrus, and those blobs can be programmatically retrieved, isn't it? That is probably the best part of integrating with Walrus, which was not available up until now. So people from the community can well retrieve each of these blobs, look at what ad impressions are part of each of these blobs. So you will have a programmatic access to each ad impression that has been delivered by Alkimi. So for now, that programmatic access was not available. You would only get access to aggregated data, which would be provided to you in terms of the number of ad transactions, the number of ad impressions that were delivered by Alkimi every day. But now, people from the community can actually retrieve each of those blobs that have been posted by Alkimi and read the contents of the blobs, determine what are the ad impressions, what are their values, and that creates a completely different layer of intelligence on which the financial transparency can be built.
So what I would like to add here is, Chandru, Walrus allows integration using command line interface. They have their own SDK. They allow HTTP based integration through publisher. So all these modes of or integrating with Walrus is available as part of the Walrus development kit. So as part of our ad exchange, so we integrate with the SUI publisher, which is a HTTP based publisher, which allows REST API based integration. So we compile all the ad transactions, create a blob out of it, and then post it to the SUI publisher, which in turn takes care of pushing the data into Walrus and getting it certified with SUI, and gives us two identifiers, which is the blob ID and which is given by the Walrus, and then SUI gives us object ID. So these are the references to what we have stored, and we store this internally so that we can backtrack it, get the blobs using these IDs, and then get into the content as required.
That's very true. So just to provide a little bit of context here, now we have a certain number of ad transactions, thousands of millions of ad transactions. As you know, we are delivering over 10 million ad transactions every day. Now, batches of these ad transactions containing ad impressions are put into a blob, and these blobs are stored on Walrus. And each blob is associated with a blob ID, and using this blob ID, you can go onto Walrus Scan and you can retrieve the blob itself. Now, when a blob is stored on Walrus, it's also automatically notarized on SUI. So that creates a transaction on SUI, and that provides us with a SUI object ID. So every ad impression is associated with a blob ID, or rather, a blob ID is associated with multiple ad impressions or ad transactions, each of which has their own ID, and each blob also has a SWI object ID which is notarized on the SWI blockchain. So now what people will be able to do is trace back from each ad transaction to a blob and then determine the blob ID that is notarized on SWI, thereby providing the complete chain right from the ad impression that was delivered to the blob to a notarization on SWI layer 1. This is the whole spectrum of transparency that will be provided.
Just to summarize, all our ad impressions, all our ad transactions were already being publicly available on Ad Explorer. Now, we are saying that this transaction which is rolled up into blocks, can also be retrieved from Walrus Scan as well as SWI Scan. So this gives an additional level of transparency and auditability to the community.
See, there is a link that we have to follow. What was seen on Ad Explorer was the bid request ID and the details associated with that bid request ID. So now we have not just the bid request ID, but the blob ID and the SWI object ID that are associated with each bid request ID. So each blob ID corresponds to a blob that we store on Walrus, and that blob ID is associated with multiple bid requests. So you will be able to see, if you have a bid request, what is the blob ID it is associated with, and that blob ID detail can be found on Walrus Scan, as would every blob that is posted onto Walrus that has a entry on Walrus Scan. So you know what is the blob that is stored on Walrus, and by tracking the Alkimi wallets that are posting these blobs onto Walrus, you will be able to retrieve all of the blobs that Alkimi has posted, and hence a programmatic record of all of the bid requests and ad transactions and ad impressions that have gone through Alkimi Ad Exchange. The second level of linkage is that for every blob that is posted on Walrus Scan, that is posted on Walrus and then is visible on Walrus Scan, there is an associated SWI object ID. And using that SWI object ID, you can go onto SWI Scan and you can look at details of the blob, the metadata associated with the blob that is not present either on Ad Explorer or on Walrus Scan. So this provides you with the complete link all the way from the ad impression to the bid request ID to the blob ID which contains that particular bid request, and then all the way to SWI object ID, thereby giving people the confidence that nothing has changed right from the delivery of the ad impression to the notarization. That is the level of assurance that we want to provide to publishers and to advertisers. And just circling back, all of that impression, the ad impression data, you may ask me, why is this assurance required? Now, the assurance is required because we need to move from the being transparent about ad impressions to providing the same level of auditability, transparency, and assurance as far as our financial transparency is concerned as well, which is where all of the ad impression data that you can now track back all the way to an L1, we can aggregate all of that data. And by the way, all of this can be done using Move smart contracts, right? Where all of the data can be aggregated, and that aggregated data can then be tied from a campaign to a publisher. So we can always say these many number of ad impressions were delivered because of this particular ad campaign, and it was delivered on publisher A. And if we were to then associate the ad campaign with a wallet and a publisher with a wallet, that level of aggregated financial information that is derived from the ad impression data can then be used to transfer certain dollar value from a campaign wallet to a publisher wallet, thereby giving you not just transparency and auditability about the ad impression data, but also tying it to financial auditability and a near seamless method of moving monetary value from the demand side all the way to the supply side.
So it's only beneficial for advertisers, media agencies, uh, to be on chain. So instead of having multiple hops, so it's in their favor to make sure that both publishers and advertisers are completely connected via Alkimi X. Is that right?
That's true. In fact, we do not impose the fact that somebody needs to have a wallet. That's something that Alkimi can cover for them as well. So we can always, there are a lot of campaigns that will be prepaid for, and we can use that prepayment to load up a campaign wallet, which then gets aggregated. All the ad impressions for that particular ad campaign gets aggregated once a day or once a week, whatever that period is, and then a certain monetary value can be moved from wallet A associated with the wallet to associated with the campaign to wallet B associated with the publisher. And we can also then compute the amount of transaction fee that needs to be paid to Alkimi, and that can then be routed to an Alkimi wallet while the rest can go on to the publisher's wallet. So that is the complete, not just the ad transparency, but also the financial transparency that we've been talking about. We spoke about Sui, we spoke about Walrus, which is the decentralized storage solution. We now have to speak about Seal and its implications for Alkimi, and there are many more that we also have to talk about in the later sessions. We'll get to that in a minute. But coming back to Seal, now Alkimi, in the process of delivering ad impressions, is privy to a lot of confidential data, is privy to a lot of PII data, personally identifiable information. As we roll out different ways and methods to target users with advertisements, we will be privy to a lot of personally identifiable information that will be made available to us by partners such as data management platforms, DMPs we refer to them, where there are segment IDs associated with users. And there is also various other bits of information that cannot be exposed to the community, and there is a need for the same level of assurance with all of this confidential information as well, while keeping it restricted to only authorized users. So there is another layer that Mr. Labs since we have built on top of Walrus, which is referred to as Seal, which helps us deal with this challenge. And with Seal, what we can do is to encrypt the data or the blobs that are being stored on Walrus, and we can provide certain wallets the authority to retrieve and decrypt that data and to see whatever is within the blob. So if we were to create a blob with certain financially confidential information, like for example, if we do not want to reveal, and I'm just making this an example as we go along, it may or may not be the way we use it. So if we were to say there is publisher A and there is a campaign B, and certain amount of money needs to be paid from campaign B to publisher A, and whoever those people are associated with these IDs, if that information is stored in a blob, and only certain authorized users, either from publisher or from the advertiser or the brand, needs to access that information, then we can provide authorization to decrypt and read the contents of the blob only to that publisher and only to that particular advertiser. So that is a level of confidentiality, that is a level of SLAs that we can then impose on the decentralized storage solution that is made available by Walrus. And that is a very, very useful feature for us to have. And there are many, many implications, not just to the financial realm, but also with respect to the PII data, user data. We can look at various other options. You know, we just need to be creative about how this is going to be used. But these are the tools that have been given to us by Mr. Labs, and that is something that I'm very, very keen to explore. So as we move on to Seal, I think there are a lot more features as well that we would like to get into the details of, and we will be exploring them in the coming sessions. So we will be touching upon validators, we will be touching upon AdFi as well, which is a very, very interesting topic that I would like to explore in more detail with Choli. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you in the next section.